When I was 29 years old, I suffered a massive seizure. It sent me to the emergency department where I found out I had a malignant brain tumor or a mass in my brain. And I was completely healthy at the time. So I had no idea. I had actually no warning that something was going on in my brain.
This is Liz Salmi. At the time, in 2008, she was a drummer in a punk rock band. She lived in Sacramento, and her day job was in web design and then communications. And at the age of 29, brain cancer.
And that, sent me down this journey of going to the hospital, having a brain surgery, having another brain surgery, and then going through chemotherapy for 2 years. 2 years of chemotherapy. At the time, I was between jobs and did not have health insurance. And so it was also put me in the space of, wow, I need to, as a kind of healthy young person or 29 years old, I had to figure out quickly how to get myself insured while also having a brain tumor.
But Liz was exceptionally resilient, and she had tons of questions. How could someone as young as she have a brain tumor? She wanted to know more.
So I was more just curious about the whole thing. And it wasn't, I'd say parts of it was a scary thing. Like, what is this going to mean? How long is my lifespan? What is this thing overall? How malignant is this cancer? Will I make it to my 30th birthday?
Well, she did make it to her 30th birthday. She did get insurance. And 8 years later, after multiple surgeries and test after test, she needed to change her health insurance. And that meant she needed to get her health records.
I realized I had to create a complete medical records request in order to transfer that information to where I would receive care in the future. And with that, I went down to what's called the medical secretary's office and said, hey, can I get a copy of my medical records for the last 8 years so I can take them to my new doctor? And they said, and at the time, it was not free to request your medical records. And so I said, how much does that cost? Or how many pages are my medical record? And they said, well, you've been here for 8 years and you've had a lot going on. So it's a 4,839 page document of if you wanted that printed, and that would be really expensive. So I was like, well, can I, they said, but we suggest that we put these on a DVD for you, a DVD. And I was like, okay, DVD. And my computer at the time had a DVD slot. Like, what is on this that is so valuable that would take up 4,800 pages in a PDF? So I stuck it in my computer, I opened up the document, and I was blown away by what I saw.
Why was it so hard for Liz, who was literally fighting brain cancer, to get her 4,800-page health record? Why is it so complicated? Why is it easy for you to go to one bank and then take your money to a different bank? That's no problem, but it's so damn hard to do the same thing with health data. This is what we're exploring on today's episode of The People's AI, once again presented by the Vana Foundation. I'm your host, Jeff Wilser, a longtime journalist and the host of the AI Summit at Consensus. And I am proud to again partner with Vana to bring you Season 4 of The People's AI, where we will sharpen our focus on kind of what sounds like an abstract and almost opaque topic of data portability, but see how it is far more real, more concrete, and even life and death, as in the case of Liz, than you might guess. Vana is supporting the creation of a new internet, one rooted in data sovereignty, user ownership, and data portability. Their mission is to create a decentralized data ecosystem where individuals, not corporations, govern their own data and share in the value it creates. Learn more at vana.org. And over the course of this season, we'll be slicing and dicing the topic of data portability from a ton of angles. But for now, right now, we wanted to anchor this in something we can all easily relate to: healthcare. There is a ton of excitement by medical experts right now that AI can dramatically improve the quality of care, but much of its progress hinges on access to data. That can be biometric data, lab results, wearables, you name it. Much of the excitement is about healthcare versions of digital twins, but that also requires good data. And new research, besides common sense, shows there is a real cost to hospitals and insurance companies keeping all of this data siloed. It's a cost to you as a patient and a cost to the medical space at large, a cost to academics who want good studies, a cost to innovators who want to create new solutions and personalized treatments. When we have a better pool of data, we get better studies, a better corpus of medical knowledge. Now, studies show a lack of this data can cost billions and put human lives in jeopardy. We'll get into all of that. But first, let's get back to Liz. When she finally cracked open her 4,800 pages of health records on that DVD, she felt like she was finally seeing what's really going on, finally seeing the truth.
And it was basically everything that was going on behind the scenes about my care for the prior 8 years that I actually could never see myself. The vast majority of what is in our medical records are our doctor's notes, what the doctor's writing about us after each visit, charting whether it's in the middle of the day or the end of the day or like the next day. And it was like the Truman Show.
Liz felt empowered by this newfound knowledge, and that would not surprise healthcare regulators from Canada, who did extensive studies on the cost of data being trapped. In a study from earlier this year, Canada's Competition Bureau found that just from insurance alone, better data portability could save Canadians between roughly $1 and $4 billion a year, partly because people could switch more easily, and partly because it would waste less of our time. They also found that the healthcare system as a whole would benefit from more fluid data systems. And they now have legislation to prevent data blocking. To see why, consider Liz's experience.
So what happens next is I then take that document, I completely save the PDF, which I still have. And then, you take it to where you're going to receive care in the future. I sent it to, I now receive my care at UC Davis Health here in Sacramento, as well as UCSF in San Francisco. And so that's a really practical thing. You take that record and you send it to your new clinicians you're going to see. And then what happens next is I continued to stay curious about what was in my records. And, today and at that time and now today still, becoming a patient advocate and talking to other patients, online through what was formerly called Twitter, getting involved in patient communities, meeting other patient advocates who are outside of the brain cancer space, diabetes, cystic fibrosis, name all the conditions. We were talking online. And I was asking other, my patient colleagues, can you see what has been being written about you? I just found all this information. I found treasure. Have you seen the treasure? And some of them had not seen that information. And we're like, what the hell are you talking about?
By now, Liz was more than just curious. She was getting fluent in these records. And she was so dialed in, she was able to spot mistakes the doctors or nurses had overlooked.
I had surgery, and maybe once my brain has kind of, pieced itself back together about a month later, I, of course, go in and look at the surgical report, and I just want to know what's going on. And, I don't understand all of the words, but that's okay because I actually found an error in my record by looking at them. And for example, I am both-handed, ambidextrous, and my surgical report said this right-handed woman, da-da-da-da-da-da. And handedness in neurosurgery is huge. And if I had not spotted that and immediately contacted my neurosurgeon's office to say, hey, make that correction, that error would get copied and pasted into future documentation within all of my health system there. And so I sent a message. I said, this hypo is incorrect. Can you get that fixed? They said, yes, immediately. So sorry. And thanks for catching that. And so their response wasn't of annoyance or, why are you even looking at that? It was like, oh, shoot, that is really important to your care. And we want to make sure it doesn't get copy and pasted going forward. And medical error is huge. So, yeah.
Liz now hammers home a key point.
Doctors have their eyes on 1,000 charts, and a patient has their eye on one chart. And there's no better person to catch the error in the record than the patient themselves.
But spotting errors is just part of the story. New research, new studies, new treatments, and new drugs are often based on large pools of data. If the model was anchored more on your personal data, we could get better results than just the blobby average of a population.
So imagine you had an AI model that was going to predict whether you were having a heart attack or not. And its only access is to one particular health system's medical record.
This is Dr. Matthew DeCamp of the University of Colorado. He's a practicing internist. He conducts research on health studies. He conducts research on health systems. He's a philosopher, and he studies medicine and ethics. He thinks a lot about health and data portability.
But it turns out that you had been at a different health system 3 weeks before, and you'd already had a heart attack, and the model doesn't see it. It's going to make an incorrect prediction, more than likely, about you and your healthcare. So this idea of having portability, having synchronization between health records really is critically important, I think, even at the individual level. And frankly, it's not a problem we've been able to solve since the advent of the electronic health record more than 10, 15 years ago.
Dr. DeCamp notes that things have gotten better. Way back in 2008, Liz had to pay for that DVD, or she could have paid a lot more for those 4,800 pages. This is no longer the case. Thanks to a law called the 21st Century CARES Act, it's harder for companies to block access to data and easier for patients to get it for free. And yes, just in case there is any confusion on this point, you are legally owed your health records, or you can legally get them. If you call your doctor's office and ask for your records, they need to give it to you, full stop. So things have improved, but the framework is still clunky, as not every system is formatted the same way or speaks the same data language.
Even going back, you think about the way electronic health records came out, there's not just one vendor. That market is becoming increasingly consolidated, but there wasn't just one vendor to start. And so health systems picked their own system. So it's a patchwork. It's a difficult problem. There's been, I think, a long-standing legal tradition that the health record itself is owned by the health system. It's not a piece of your property. And that understandably rubs people the wrong way, because understandably say, well, that's about me.
And in a way, there are sort of two problems here on both sides of the coin. When data is not easy to share, when it's not portable, there's a group problem and an individual problem. If the model does not ingest enough data from all different people and demographics and walks of life, the overall population can be biased. To be more concrete, for decades, there was a problem because health studies only included men, which is wild and wrong on at least 37 different levels.
Of course, the algorithm was built on a collective of everyone's data.
Yeah.
And so if those data are not, again, fully comprehensive because they're excluding certain health systems or they're excluding certain people, then of course that algorithm is not going to be as good as it could have been.
Yeah.
And I think the second aspect of that is also that it means that our algorithms may be built only based on data from certain healthcare systems. And patients know and people know that there are very big differences between, say, a large urban quaternary transplant center compared to a rural hospital, perhaps in a community.
Yeah.
And if our models are only built on those large academic quaternary centers, then we'd have good reason to believe that they might not perform as well when they're in a very different setting. At the collective level, there are problems as well with how algorithms get built and how they perform.
But then on an individual level, if there's not good data on you as a person, then you lose the benefit of a more personalized diagnosis. And personalized is definitely the direction medicine is headed in. And that gets us into the world of healthcare and digital twins.
The human body is really complex. I mean, rockets are complex, HVAC systems are complex, but the human body has a real unique level of complexity. And I think with not only advancing in advancements in computing, but things like agentic AI and AI frameworks and local large language models, we're now starting to see opportunities to exploit that computing at scale that fits well with a human digital twin.
This is Jim St. Clair, the CEO of a company called MyLigo. And when I first hear digital twin, honestly, I sort of think of the companies trying to create a digital twin for you to be on a Zoom call or to do your busy work and answer your emails while you're out roller skating. Jim explains that in the context of medicine, a digital twin is a very different beast, and some consider it foundational to the future of healthcare.
The first thing I'd say is that the digital twin definition itself is pretty flexible. So there are some initiatives running around calling themselves digital twins that it's not necessarily wrong, but it may not recognize the full breadth of what we're considering in other aspects of medical research or biomedical applications. You know, the basic definition of a digital twin is that it's a digital system, a virtual system that represents dynamically what a physical system is doing. And there's expected to be a feedback loop, something where the physical system guides what the output is from a digital system, and conversely, the digital system can provide feedback into the physical system. So I think that's easily recognizable. When you're talking something like a virtual human twin or a digital twin for patients and for medical digital twins, you know, to date, there's been lots of examination of, well, we'll have a digital twin of the heart, or we'll have a digital twin of the lung, and it's simulating, you know, parts of the body or some part of the 13 biological systems. But the idea of having one composite twin or one sort of digital twin for the person overall is still very early in its examination, and also very early in application of both the science and the research to understand how to do that.
And to be very almost cartoonishly simplistic here, is the idea essentially that this allows simulation in scenario modeling instead of, whereas in reality, if we're saying, hey, we're going to give a patient this treatment, well, obviously the consequences and stakes are real. You can't do that 2 times, much less hundreds of iterations. But the digital twin, it's almost like you say, hey, we're in this safe digital laboratory environment. We're going to see how the body responds to if we inject this drug or this therapy. Am I getting that right?
You're exactly right. And imagine if you were for a clinical trial. So a clinical trial is, hey, we do a bunch of lab work. We have a new experimental drug. We're taking it through the various phases of clinical trials. Each of those phases are designed to use real humans to determine, does this drug interact with people in a way that derives the benefits you're looking for? It's a vaccine, or it helps, you know, limit death or illness for some condition. Well, in the digital twin world, we also call that in silico medicine. Instead of in vitro, where it's actually going into a human body, we're trying to have enough modeling, simulation, and dynamic forecasting that we can do it on a silicon chip, that we can do it on a computer, that we can understand how a drug will potentially interact with a variety of human physiological states without ever having to inject the person in it to start with. And that's where it kind of follows the model that's going on in manufacturing. In a few other cases, there's more work done where building a car, building a rocket, they'll design a digital twin of that system first to understand the intricacies of the system before they actually start putting metal together and putting wheels on the frame. We're trying to aspire to be able to do the same thing in healthcare, where, just as you mentioned, hey, we think we've got a new cure for this particular type of cancer, new immunotherapy regimen for this type of cancer. What can we find out electronically from digital twins and available data first in its synthesis before we actually start applying it to real humans in vitro? I think a lot of my colleagues in the community look to a day in the future where you have your own digital twin. And imagine, if you will, that for that standpoint, you can apply different aspects of your environment, or the foods you consume, or your microbiome, or medications you take. And those will guide in understanding potential outcomes. So if you think about just enabling healthy living and enabling longevity, a lot of those factors deal with things like recognizing disease early, the efficacy and effectiveness of different treatment regimens you're prescribed, where you live, the things you're subjected to in your environment. That's a lot of information that right now isn't necessarily stored in one place. And what we know about you and what impact that information has to you as an individual still has a great deal of research that has to be done. So if you just imagine both the combination of computing power as well as advancing in sciences, bringing some portion of that under your control. And when I say under your control, maybe it's something you access on a laptop. Maybe it's something that's on your phone, but some digital twin of you that for various purposes can kind of serve as a life coach that gives you feedback as to how you're doing that day, measures the dynamics of if you've been out too late at night or you had a little bit too much to eat, understands the importance of potential exposures to certain substances, for instance, or atmospheric things that guide where you may have impacts to your longevity. And that's a dynamic model that you can leverage.
To get another perspective, I spoke with Dr. Reinhard Lobenbacher, the director of the Laboratory for Systems Medicine at the University of Florida. He recently co-authored a paper, Digital Twins Are a Key Enabling Technology for Personalized Medicine. But he points out that the roots of this tech are not really new and they go back decades.
This is a concept that comes from industry. In fact, it goes back to NASA, the approach of NASA to kind of make virtual replicas of things they send up into outer space, so you can test them. And so digital twins are essentially tools of what is today called personalized medicine or precision medicine. Right? The idea that, if you go to a doctor with a particular medical condition, then today, in most cases, you get treated just like, thousands of other patients. You go in, your blood pressure is, 140/90, and then you get certain drugs without really any sort of a personalized investigation of, what would work best for you. So these digital twins can be quite powerful. They're difficult to build. There are not very many that are in operation, I would say.
Now, I'll confess that this can seem awfully abstract and I can get confused. So I asked Reinhard for a concrete example. And what he chose surprised me because it's not at all the kind of digital twin I'd imagined of some, avatar that looks just like me, but with better skin and fuller hair.
Let me give you an example of one that's actually approved by the Food and Drug Administration that tens of thousands of patients use. And every time in a talk I give this example, somebody afterwards, or almost every time, somebody afterwards will come and say, look, I have this particular device. And this is something that's called an artificial pancreas. And that's designed to help type 1 diabetes patients. So type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. Your pancreas is not able to produce insulin. And so it doesn't react when you need insulin at different levels. Mm-hmm. And the artificial pancreas is essentially a mathematical model. It's a collection of equations that describes your metabolism of glucose. So it's maybe 20, 30 equations. They will describe glucose metabolism. And you have a subcutaneous sensor under your skin that measures glucose levels, feeds them into this model. And this model then it runs on a little smartphone-like device that is strapped to your waist or somewhere. Mm-hmm. And that calculates at that time how much insulin you need. And then it automatically drives an insulin pump that's strapped to your calf or some other kind of place that injects the right amount of insulin. So that is almost automatic, not quite. You still need to input some information about what you're about to eat or what you're about to do. But what it eliminates is you to periodically during the day measure your glucose levels, that inject some insulin that has all the known problems that come with it. Measurement is not done right or things like that. So it eliminates a lot of these a lot of these issues. And whenever I talk to people who actually have one of these devices, they will say it has really changed their lives. So in this case, the digital twin of your pancreas is this mathematical model that sits on that smartphone.
Okay.
Right? And that is fed by data from you. So it is routinely calibrated to you. So it kind of evolves with you as like sort of your virtual pancreas. And it does what your actual pancreas should be doing, but isn't.
So sorry, I'm being slow here. So this it's almost like it's a simulation digitally of your pancreas. Exactly. And as it's getting fed new data about your glucose levels, it's then figuring out, it's almost like it's running simulations of, given this glucose level, glucose is high right now. The likely outcome of glucose being high is the pancreas might have all of these bad outcomes, or vice versa. And then because the digital twin scenario goes to a bad place, we now know you actually need to lower the level of glucose or raise it or whatever it is. But it's almost like running simulations in the twin and then real time giving you the application to do in your actual pancreas. Am I getting that right?
You're exactly right. Great description.
Interesting. And that's, I think, useful because a lot of folks, including myself, when they hear digital twin, they're imagining some avatar of your face, of like seeing the full version of you on a Zoom screen. And, I'm your twin. I will now answer your emails for you and appear on Zoom calls for you. But that's not what it's about at all. It's about modeling specific elements of the human body systems and then having it inform smart choices.
Exactly. And I mean, in principle, it could be, digital instantiation of your entire body, all its complexity, and ideally sometime in the very distant future in a far, far away galaxy, we'll get there.
Jim St. Clair makes the case that this emerging digital twin tech is not just a nice to have, it's crucial for our collective health.
I think the important thing to realize as we approach all these conversations about AI and healthcare and personal health data spaces and digital twins is that we have a real necessity for it. There's an argument about AI replacing doctors and when that can be done and if it can ever be done. But the sheer demographics in the US, in the global north, the global south for that matter, are that demographically, we will have less doctors in the future. And we'll still have plenty of people that need to see doctors in parts of the countries that they can't. So if we don't bring tools to bear like AI and digital twins and your personal health data spaces where you can have more cognizance over your own health and health information, the same way you manage your own bank account, then we're going to face, I think even greater problems with disparity and as a result, a general decline in health outcomes.
So what's stopping us? What's the biggest challenge to get there, to get to this future, this potential digital twins from personalized medicine and all the better health outcomes that could yield? Well, if you are a regular listener of the People's AI, you can probably guess the answer. A one-word answer: data. Or maybe 2 words: data portability.
I think one of the biggest constraints that we have right now as health systems look at adopting AI is only as good as the quality of the data that you're working with. So it becomes very challenging that even if every health organization theoretically allowed you to access all your data freely and get to it at any time, the quality of that data, does that data yield the information you need for whatever computational decision that's being made? Even if it's just simply, managing your blood sugar or some other chronic condition that you have, much less being fed into a digital twin, the necessity for data governance and clean, reliable individual data is going to be even more of a challenge than right now. In some conversations I've been in, there's been questions about, AI hallucinations. We love to talk about, we can't have hallucinations in healthcare. Well, that's fine. Then all you have to do is ensure that 100% of the data stored in your EHR is exactly correct and that every name is there and every lab result is captured properly and in the proper data formats and reusable structures. And without that, then the computational models you have become challenged.
To create digital twins that actually lead to real health wins, we'll need better data from individuals, from systems, from research, from companies. And of course, that gets even more complicated when big tech companies own the platforms that might store your biometric and wearables data. Microsoft, Amazon, OpenAI, and Anthropic are all testing or have actually out there some version of tools to track and synthesize your health and biometrics data. And of course, Apple has an ocean of health data from Apple Watch.
I throw into 3 buckets. There's research data. So your large institutes, your university research facilities, high performance computing centers. And then kind of in the middle, you have healthcare systems or academic medical centers and the like. And they have EHRs. They may have other tools for collecting data, clinical data repository and the like. And then there's you and the data you collect and the data you could have. And that data may be your wearables. It may be other devices in the house, other parts of Internet of Things that give information about you. From my perspective, really having a successful individual digital twin is going to come down to how are those 3 sources of data assimilated, analyzed, and then something that you can use individually. So when it gets into that data ownership question, I think certainly everybody would imagine, and for the most part, we're in a world where if your Apple Watch generates data about you and your blood pressure or the number of steps you take, that's your data. You're the one bringing that to a discussion or bringing that to share with your physician right now. And then, of course, there's kind of the data that's collected about you in the course of seeing doctors and having tests. And it gets a little fuzzy as to who owns that or who controls it, but it still can contribute to your model. And then from a research perspective, academic researchers may or may not have any data about you as an individual, but you then have a genomic profile or a biological profile, and they're doing lots of heavy number crunching with various biological profiles from other data sets that they have accumulated or collected or are analyzing to provide feedback to your model. So it may not be anything about you specifically or any of your biological information, but because they had other models to work with, it provides input into your digital twin to guide what you do with your data and what your next steps are.
As for Reinhard, he clarified that the digital twins he's talking about are not fueled by AI, instead more rules and program-based, but agreed that data is absolutely key to this, and the data needs to move freely.
Data, of course, is crucial. Data describes for us the real world. Right? That's how we see the real world. And those in biology and in medicine, they are a variety of data. They can be, data that measure the expression of all the 20,000 genes in a particular cell in your liver. They could be data that measure your lung function. They could be data that measure your exposure to particular irritants or pollutants in the neighborhood you live in. It's a wide range of data. And that's sort of our interface with the world. And what we then need to do is out of these data, we need to sort of fashion an understanding of what the world is. Right. So, if you're familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave, right, you have these prisoners in the cave and they see, shadows on the wall.
Shadows, yeah.
What's going on the outside. And the data is what is our collection of shadows. And from these shadows, we need to fashion our understanding of the world. And we do that with mathematical equations, mathematical models that we can simulate on a computer.
Is it fair to say that the progress you've made so far was kind of only possible by getting a certain amount of data, and some important improvements that have been made to regulation, like forcing hospitals to share electronic health records, that has led to an improvements in data portability, or the ability to collect data from different systems to create enough of a pool of data to build these models, and then to intersect individual someone's profile into that model to help with things like the pancreas digital twin. That has helped get to where we are, but it's likely we'll even need a more fluid data ecosystem to allow for the accumulation of the data needed to really create improved digital twins to help create that more personalized, targeted medicine. And that essentially means more data portability, the ability to get data across different systems and be able to use in a smart way. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Jeff. And of course, one of the challenges is, right? So now, so for example, we are looking at digital twins, building digital twins for different applications in the intensive care unit. So we have access to data sets of 10, 20, 30,000 patients from an intensive care unit. But of course, these data all need to be de-identified, right? Yeah. No hospital could simply put out, I would not want my hospital to put out my data. So there's a major effort involved in de-identifying data. So one of the challenges is simply the challenge of privacy, and that cannot be avoided, right? That's a good constraint to have.
It's almost like we need a way to create a liquid ecosystem so that data can be easily shared. That's crucially also privacy preserving. And I think also should be done in a way that respects the fact that the user, the patient, ultimately owns the data. That's the data challenge at the heart of this.
You're exactly right. And aside from that, simply measurements, right? We need to be able to measure all sorts of things in your body, on your body, that at the moment we don't have the right kind of technology. We need more developments in sensor technology, various other things. But that's really a matter of time. I mean, that's all sort of happening.
So to come full circle where we started, the theme here is that when patients have easier access to records, to data, the patients win. The health system wins because we get a better, richer pool of data to inform studies and treatment. This is what Liz had guessed all along, that having the records would help. And she found that she was far from alone.
Why in 2017, when I had to transfer my records, why could I not see it? And that was the big question that a team of researchers I now currently work with was asking at the time. It was called the OpenNotes lab at Beth Israel. And so, the hospital there at the time, which I knew nothing about, was asking the same thing because they were sharing their records with patients. And they realized other hospitals were not doing that. And so that spurred a massive, 3-site trial about what if we just started sharing this with patients in, say, primary care. And what they found was the worry from doctors back then was, well, patients can't understand what doctors are writing about them. There's no possible way. We use special lingo. We use acronyms. There's an acronym for shortness of breath that says SOB. And if a patient sees SOB in their record, they're going to be offended. So there's a lot of worry from medical professionals that patients can't understand, which is paternalistic.
So the OpenNotes team said, you know what? Let's quantify this. Let's do a study.
Tom Delbenko and Jan Walker, the founders of kind of this OpenNotes movement and lab at Beth Israel, really, they started this area of research of figuring out if patients are looking at their records, what happens? And they conducted this seminal study. It was 3 sites around the country. It was Beth Israel in Boston. There was a rural hospital in Pennsylvania, and then a safety net hospital in Seattle. And they said, if we share with patients the records or the notes that are being written by these, the hospitals at the doctors at these 3 health systems, what would happen? And they started a study that they spanned it over a year. And they asked the doctors in advance, what do you think if patients start reading your notes? And the doctors are like, we're going to get a ton of phone calls. Patients will not understand this information. And we're actually kind of worried. Meanwhile, they surveyed the patients it was about 20,000 patients on the panel who would start seeing this information. They said, what do you patients, what do you think are going to happen once you actually can see what your doctors are writing? And the patient respondents were like, I don't know. Never seen this information before, but we're not worried about it. So they start the study that goes over this 3-year period. They start the study, and a month into it, the doctors who are involved are like, we haven't heard anything. Is this study happening yet? Or have you started? They're like, oh, it started. And we can see that patients are reading what you're writing. They're like, okay. And so, jumping ahead, at the end of this 1-year pilot study, again, 3 sites, different types of patient populations. What they learned is, from a patient perspective, 98% of the patients who were enrolled in the study, the 20,000 people loved overwhelmingly being able to read their doctor's notes. They felt like they were more informed about their care. They started asking better questions, and this is key, started sharing that information that they could see in their notes with the other people in their lives, the care partners, their family members. And follow-up studies, going on that track, started to show that caregivers loved reading their notes even more than the patients. And then meanwhile, on the doctor side, and this is the thing that a lot of researchers, wonder, is like, what do the doctors think? And they felt this was great. Their patients started asking more informed questions, and they would show up at the next visit even more prepared. They would say, hey, I read what you wrote last time, and I wanted to bring that into this visit. So resoundingly, it was a hit. And it was this research was published in this big medical journal, the Annals of Internal Medicine. And everybody, at the OpenNotes team was excited. They were like, yay, we published this paper. This is so good. And the response with, all of medicine was like, that was a one-off. That's a fluke. That could not happen again. So let's keep going. And so
20,000 person fluke.
20,000 person
20,000 flukes. Yes.
Not, those patients are special.
Yeah.
This could never happen again. So of course that took the team I now work with, sparked their energy to keep going and really kind of prove this in many different settings, in pediatric, with older pediatrics, older adults, this, that, and the other thing. And then those who were like the haters of this idea, they, started doing their own studies to say, well, could this happen again at other sites? And that's the important thing. And again, the same results happened in different settings and now around the world.
Liz, the former punk rock drummer, is now the Communications and Patient Initiatives Director for OpenNotes. More generally, she is a patient advocate and leads what she calls the Liz Army to make health research more accessible and understandable for everyone. You can see her writings, there are links to in the show notes, her writings about using ChatGPT and AI tools with her health records. It's all very, very cool. Her tagline is bringing punk rock to healthcare. And yes, she has purple hair and it is awesome. And that is going to do it for this episode of The People's AI, presented by the Vana Foundation. Thank you to our guests, Liz Salmi, who's bringing punk rock to healthcare, to Dr. Matthew DeCamp, to Jim St. Clair, and to Dr. Reinhard Lobenbacher. Thank you again to my partner, the Vana Foundation. Vana is supporting the creation of a new internet, one rooted in data sovereignty, user ownership, and data portability. Their mission is to create a decentralized data ecosystem where individuals, not corporations, govern their own data and share in the value it creates. Learn more at vana.org. Thank you to Kate Morgan for research and producing, and thank you to Jasper Chua for sound design, music, editing, and our YouTube videos. Thank you to Bradford Craig for our theme music. And thank you to you, dear listener. If this is your first time at The People's AI, please subscribe, share it on social, send to a friend. Thanks again, and see you next time.